Hello, today we will be doing a book reading for you. Today's book is a fantasy novel, which is the type of book that I'm interested in, and it just so happens that the person that wrote the book is someone that I know, and so I have permission from the author to be able to put it onto video, so that makes it very convenient for me. So this is a book, so it's called God AMong Thieves by Jackson Lear. So if you're interested, there'll be a link down below so you can check it out. I am slightly biased, but I did start reading the book and I did enjoy reading the book and I completed reading the book, and I have bugged him about when's the next one coming out, because you know how you start reading a book and you want to learn more about it. Well, yeah, so I guess just a quick little review. I kind of enjoyed the book. It's not your everyday book where it follows a set path story that, for example, like a Hollywood movie, you know, blah, 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 you know, the man gets the woman, the hero saves the day, kind of thing. There's a few unexpected turns of events. There's a couple of parts of the book that I found a little confusing. It might have been that I was maybe reading it too fast, so I'm not the best person to review the book, but I did find it enjoyable. I did enjoy certain moments of the book. I sort of hoped to see other moments in the book that I didn't see, and so I hope the next book will have those in it. So let me begin. So this is book 1, God AMong Thieves by Jackson Lear. So here's a bit of a map, but you don't really have to worry too much about the map, if you can see that, because we're only be reading the first part. They don't really move much, but throughout the book there is significant travels. What I would recommend, and what I've recommended to the author, is that he puts a little chart in or a table of some of the characters, because there's a few characters and I got a little confused with some of the characters at first. Chapter 1. He was dead, lying face up on the rocky desert surface. The rest of the brigands wouldn't be too far away. Lasden dismounted, drew his sabre and edged towards the body before him. Jadero remained perched on his horse, his flintlock musket fixed upon the western horizon, ready to snap the trigger at whoever might have the gall to ambush them. Even from several yards away, they could see the dead man's lips had turned burgundy, punctured by his own teeth. His bloodshot eyes bulged into the dry night air, staring with enraged betrayal at the moonlit sky. A black tattoo crept out from the edge of his collar. More covered his hands and fingers. A snake dominated the crude designs wrapped around his fingers, curving upwards and coiling itself around the wrist. The dead man's clothes were cheap enough to be cast aside by monks and pulped into paper. His breath reeked a noxious mix of vinegared wine, bile, and The crunch of pebbles against the rock from under Lasden's tanned boots stopped as he dropped to one knee to get a closer smell. He brushed away the night blue scarf protecting his face against the grit and sand, and leaned in close to the corpse. Something beyond the dead man's body odour called out to him. Flowers? It was subtle, but definitely there, buried in the gut of the dead man, who had surely been alive the moment the sun kissed the horizon. His skin was still warm, blemished by the desert life, but otherwise healthy enough. Lasden patted the body down, rummaged through the man's purse and pockets, until he found the dagger's sheath, yet no blade. His purse held a total of 8 ducats and 4 crowns. Crowns were certainly from an imperial traveller, rare in these parts, but gaining in frequency with every passing month. The ducats belonged to Esdale, the city 20 miles east of here. Jadiro held the reins of his and Lasdun's horses in one hand as he moved westwards to survey the surrounding 50 yards. The scuffed tracks of the dead man were easy enough to find. 10 yards from the body were clear imprints of his hands and knees in the desert ground, complete with one hand raking the sand and bunching it together in a clawed grip. 20 yards from that was a side stagger and a lengthy course correction. At the 50-yard mark lay his dagger, the white scarf protecting his face from the heat, and a pool of bloody vomit. Jadiro dismounted, scooped up the dagger and scarf and dusted them off and returned to his horse. Lasdun, sporting a shovel head and a 2-day beard, approached with his protege, with his gloved hand resting on his pommel of his now sheathed sabre. "Have you ever reported in a dead body before?" "No," said Jadiro, accompanied by a controlled, though nervous shake of his head. "Then we better alert the others as fast as possible before the rest of Turstall's men can attack the city." Lasdun reached across his saddle, kicked a foot into a stirrup, and lifted himself back into command. "It's not an attack," said Jadiro. "A raid, then?" "It's not that either." The young initiate made the unfortunate mistake of locking eyes with Lasdun. The scorch of the desert sun was nothing compared to disagreeing with his lieutenant twice in as many seconds. "You don't find a brigand this close to Mokhara, unless they mean to strike at us. Call for the captain, and let's get the hell out of here." Wait. Jadiro pointed to where he found the dead man's dagger. His heart all but exploded in his chest as he raked up a third moment of contradicting his superior. The tracks. He was chasing someone before he died. This isn't a raid. The lieutenant lazily looked away from the scuffs along the ground. "The rest of them will strike in a misguided revenge when they realize one of their own is dead, this close to our home. They'll think we did it. Only they won't target someone who can fight back. It'll be one of our blacksmiths, a camel herder, or hell, some family's young daughter coming back from the oasis with water, and she'll be never seen again because of your delays right now." From the wide-eyed panic that stretched across his clean-shaven features, Jadiro had no answer to that. Lasdun levelled a moonlit stare at the young man in front of him, baiting him to buckle under the ferocity of a rancid experience. "They will do to us exactly what they think we've done to them." Jadiro drew in a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and went for it. The dead man was chasing someone who joined their group in the north. As soon as he died, whoever was chasing ran back in that direction. Why? Why go back? We are close enough to see Mokhara on the horizon. Why not come to us for help? Lasdun readied his retort. "It's because the brigands still had something valuable of theirs, be it priceless goods or someone they were with. Mokhara is not under threat, but whoever is in the north is. There might be a dozen people up there, being beaten senseless or facing execution because this one never came back alive, and the person he chased did." Jadiro nodded quickly, though he couldn't help but look away as his entire career flashed before his eyes. There would be latrines, endless latrines, and when he wasn't digging those, he would be posted by the doors so he could listen to them being used. Then, much to his surprise, the corners of Lasdun's mouth formed into something of a smile. It so startled Jadiro that he glanced back to the body lying a short walk away to ensure that this wasn't part of an elaborate prank masked as a training exercise. Most people would have missed those tracks, said Lasden. Well done. Any idea who died? It took a moment for the tension to ease. This isn't a test. Oh, he's definitely dead, and I have no idea who killed him, so we're going to find out. First things first, whose body is that? One of Terstale's men? Are you saying that because I already told you? His dagger is from Prageras, and his boots have the same kind of buckles as a military man. They certainly do, said Lasden. A few years ago, this lot killed one of the merchants travelling with them. Among his cargo was several tan robes, white scarves and the like, which is exactly what he's wearing now. Going beyond a simple, he's one of Terstale's men, he's covered in distinctive tattoos. So when you speak with Arena tonight, who are you going to tell her died? Jadiro's eyes widened as another burst of panic settled in. Come on, one of us knows, but you're the one delivering the report. Jadiro blinked quickly as he tried to settle himself. Who is he? Snake. Lasden pushed his cuffs up towards his elbow, tapped his forearm, and he turned his attention to where the brigand in question crawled at the ground, heading northward. There were faint tracks of a child, a teen perhaps, running on nothing but the balls of her feet. The moon overhead guided the child away as they ran, though why they were returning to the brigand's mountain trail instead of returning south to Mockara was curious indeed. Snake has been dead for no more than 3 hours, said Lasden. Given the almost full moon, he and Terstale's men were no doubt escorting merchants along the northern pass when something went wrong. If we ride quickly, we might be able to cut them off and keep a few merchants from losing their lives. But where did they start from? The east coast or the west? And where can we catch them? Jadiro glanced in both directions. Behind him, the lantern lights of Mockara glimmered in a pinprick along the horizon. He dropped his eyes to his musket and refocused himself on the mountain range to the north. His ears prickled against silence. Worse still, the total lack of movement from Lasden reminded him that he had only made the decision while on his first night of command. On any given evening, the brigands would be halfway across the desert by now, and the illegal travellers with them would be struggling to keep up with the pace. But if one of the merchants, especially one with such a reputation as Snake, lay dead this close to Mockara, then tonight went beyond the usual shaking down of terrified travellers. Lasden's horse huffed, breaking the silence that gnawed at Jadiro. The longer this takes, the more merchants will die. Any decision is better than none. Make it. Jadiro's first moment of authority landed and flew away before he could even register its arrival. He backtracked over Lasden's final words to make sure that he hadn't misheard him and that he was actually about to change the evening's plans, one that would expose everyone in the north to a hail of lead and bloodshed. The only thing keeping his hand steady was knowing that he could be eventually overruled. Then again, the only thing keeping him from getting a full chest of air that he would soon have to justify himself to those who controlled the rest of his career. Jadiro raised one hand to his mouth and whistled to the east a long blast, followed by 2 quick bursts calling to the other guardsmen on patrol that evening. In return came 3 short whistles. Jadiro looked back to Lasden, hoping to find some kind of approval. "You sure?" asked Lasden, as he eyed the young guardsman carefully. Jadiro offered a quick nod, followed by an even quicker yes. Lasden noted that of the boyish nerves of a young man trying to convince himself that he had made the best decision from a sea of poor options. Lasden drove his horse northward towards the Desira Mountains and away from home. Jadiro rode beside him. Was it really Snake? The tattoos match his description, so that's a win for us. Not so much of a win for whoever sold him the wine, though. I imagine his friends will have a grievance or two to work through. Lasden kept his attention locked forward, baiting Jadiro into a response. It was poison that killed him, not wine. Oh, did you have your nose an inch away from Snake's mouth? If it was wine, he wouldn't have run off through the desert. He would have died next to a campfire on his side, probably with one of his friends throwing up next to him. We catch thousands of people running through the desert every year. We catch 5 running through Mochara, and only during the Feast of the Bard. The snake was still fully dressed and is rumoured to be covered with hunter tattoos. It was poison that did this to him, not wine. Lasden turned to study Jadiro, burning him with a glare that no initiate of the Prince Guards survived without begging to be trained by someone else. The kid was holding his breath. Good, said Lasden as he relaxed into his saddle. What else? Jadiro allowed himself a moment of relief from the scant praise from Lasden. His pistol is gone, but they left behind his dagger. It looks like he dropped it when he threw up, and he was too delirious to pick it up again. So someone chased him with his own pistol? No. If they had, they would have taken his purse. Perhaps the escapee saw us on the horizon and ran off. No. No, they aren't watching us right now, waiting for us to leave so they can return to his corpse and loot him. I've already taken his dagger, and you've taken his purse, so there isn't anything to loot. Something from his days in training called back to him. What coins did you find? Lasden allowed himself another smile as he watched the young man grow in confidence. 4 crowns and 8 dockets. Were any of them fake? 2 of the dockets were certainly trimmed a little, but they looked genuine. What could you ascertain from them if they were a counterfeit? Jadiro forced in a nervous breath. Keep your eyes up. Jadiro didn't even realize he'd let his attention slip. Ascertain. He cursed himself for looking down again and doubly so for when Lasden turned his attention away, as though Jadiro was the least of his concerns right now. The soft clop-clop of horseshoes against the desert grounds seemed to hound him the longer he remained silent. The slimy sweat from under his arms returned. Behind him, the faint glimmer of Mochara faded and dropped out of sight. I ascertained that if they were counterfeit coins, then they were to be used to dupe the rich. Lasden did what he could to help Jado along. Since there was a smell of poison from Snake's gut, and not just from his lips, given the position of his body lying face up in the desert with no obvious signs of injury, it's reasonable that he died from poison. Since he did not die in the safety of his own camp or home, then I can ascertain that he was. And Jadiro quickly nodded, poisoned by one of the travellers, not one of his friends. It's not easy, though, dropping poison into a stranger's cup while they are travelling. Jadiro agonised over that one as well. I guess it's easier to poison your own drink and let someone take it from you. Yep. Curious that someone's gone to all this trouble, isn't it? Someone who knew the kind of people that they were dealing with. Someone who had something of such value that they would rather kill a mercenary than risk losing it. And someone who was probably outnumbered 20 to 1. Jadiro offered a weak, though genuine smile in return. What if we had found counterfeit coins? What then? Criminals recognise them. The border guards of Lisbor and Esdale will chop off their hands if they're caught trying to use them. Most merchants will see them for what they are, brothels, will throw them out immediately. But anyone who pays in large quantities could have slipped in unnoticed, added a couple of fakes into a bag of real coins, and then they might go unnoticed. That, or the idiot who doesn't recognize a fake coin in his hand is a lord. A tightness formed around Lasdun's mouth, forcing him to jut and retract his jaw and loosen it back to normal. You grew up with maids and the like, didn't you? I'm no lord, and neither is my father. Believe me, I've never taken your father for an idiot. The shift of tone unnerved Jadiro yet again. His lieutenant no longer sounded like a commander or playing devil's advocate. Instead, his voice bordered on genuine concern. Jadiro saw it and became quickly flustered, and he did his best to pass it off as a slight exaggeration gone awry. I mean, the lords and ladies don't really see much money, do they? Wealth, yes, but not the actual money. They'll have a servant who goes to the bank on their behalf, or another who buys all the food, and someone else who settles the bills for the family. Without nobles having to even touch a penny, there are probably entire generations of lords who have seen less coins than a beggar. Lasdun ran through Jado's reasoning. An unfortunate point, but not one without logic. Then again, perhaps Jadiro simply sprouted off criticism used by those he knew in a bid to sound more worldly. That would be easier to accept were it not for an increase of slander against the nobles in Mockra, something that had become all the rage thanks to the empire building in the north. Lasdun glanced back at the moon and grimaced at her face. In 3 days she would reach her fullest. The brigands in the north would be at their most lucrative, able to escort travellers and merchants across the narrow land passages that linked the 3 city-states of Lisbor, Mockra, and Esdale. Lisbor and Esdale had the only ports for 100 miles north and south. On any map, the land looked like an hourglass, with 3 states at the narrowest point. To the north, Mockra was uninhabitable wasteland of sheer mountains, canyons that at times were no wider than a child's shoulders, and a forest of trees and pinnacles that had turned to stone in an age long past. The south was endless as the afterlife, devoid of even the most daring Bedouins. Mockra, the oasis city in the middle of the desert, was the only means of escaping the voyage around the continents to the north and the south. It would take months for the ships to endure, though some of the worst winds and seas to the south, past the privateers and the pirates in the east, and the hundreds of states along the coast, all wanting taxes and tributes for whoever passed them by. Turstale and his brigands were a necessary evil that benefited Mockra. As long as they were a menace, the more timid merchants would be forced through Mockra instead of sneaking along the northern ridge and bypassing the 3 cities' worth of tolls. Sometimes the brigands respected their role in Mockra's economy, sometimes they didn't. Every so often they pushed a little too hard, and the Prince Regent's reputation would be hit for failing to control the rebels who lived in the north of his lands. But if there weren't enough ruffians in the north, then the penny-pinching merchants would have no qualms about landing long before they reached Lisbor or Esdale and bypass all of the fares completely. Lasdun grimaced again at the moon and sheered away from her. Someone had killed Snake. A man with a 500 to shell reward for his head. His friends would have stabbed him and cashed him in. The guardsmen would have shot him and split the cash amongst themselves. Whoever poisoned him had left his body to rot and returned to cause more mayhem. More bloodshed would be spilled while the moon lit up the night. That much was certain. Something pulled Lasdun's attention eastward. 2 riders were converging on the same spot 100 yards north. The iron horseshoes rung identical to Lasdun's and Jadiro's. He glanced back and caught Jadiro practicing his report while he still had the confidence to do so. The two riders waved a quick salute to Lasden and did the same to Jadiro. Jadiro missed it completely. They all pulled their horses inwards until the foursome were in speaking distance. While Lasden had the strength to bludgeon his foes with a great sword, and Jadiro was at home behind a musket instead of a bow, Rena had the mind and body of a fencer, fast, lean, agile, and instinctive. She came from a large family of lawyers and storytellers, accountants and poets, architects and lovers. There was always too much of one and never enough of the other. At least in theory, as a protector of the people, she had a chance of balancing both souls of life. She sat astride a mare, a sabre by her side, a musket strapped to the other. She glanced over at Lasden and gave Jadiro a neutral smile, while the gangly Isled held himself at such an upright angle that he risked losing all air to his lungs. "Report," said Rena, with her attention on Jadiro. The young man gave her a quick nod before the words tumbled out of his mouth. "Captain Lieutenant Lasden and I found the body of a man believed to be the Snake, who died this evening around dusk. It looked as though he'd been poisoned but not robbed. As one of Turnstile's men, I believe the rest of them are still close by in a central area of northern Mochra. They are likely escorting travellers from one coast to the other. These travellers are now in grave danger from the gang who will care more about retribution from their murdered friend than the well-being of strangers they only met today. We are a 2-hour ride from our town. By the time we have called for reinforcements, the travellers will certainly be dead." Jadiro gave Rena a quick nod to show that he was dumb. Lasden couldn't help but smile how easily she allowed her subordinates to fight for her approval. Jadiro and Isret were barely old enough to know how to talk to women their own age, let alone someone who knew more about them and their classmates than they would ever know of her. She rolled her eyes to her husband. Lasden gave her the slightest of nods to show that he agreed with Jadiro's report. She looked back to the young lad and continued, "How many travellers are we talking about?" "He started with 10, said Jadiro, "assuming that each traveller paid 1 ducat to each brigand. Then they set off, and there are 8 frequent travellers, either to or from Erzdale. At the going rate, there are at least 2 people from the Empire, maybe one if they're in a hurry and carrying lots of items." Rena slumped back in her saddle as all pretense of rank escaped her. "Shit, someone from the Empire is in the middle of this?" "Yeah," said Lasden. "I imagine there will be a letter for the prince in a day or 2, depending on how well we do tonight." Rena turned her attention northward. "All right, Jadiro, what's your plan?" All of his well-practiced arguments escaped him in an instant. "We ride north and save the merchant from Turnstile's revenge." "The 4 of us?" "Yes, Captain, against the dozen or so remaining mercenaries who will know the north better than we do." "Yes, Captain." "Why?" "To help the merchants. The merchants are travelling illegally through our lands and are funding these thieves and murderers every time they do. The merchants are supplying them with weapons used on your brothers and sisters of the guard, knowing that if any of them, merchants or mercenaries alike, are caught, they will face an execution by our firing squad within a day of their capture." "Yes, Captain." She clasped her hands over the pommel and leaned in to close the gap. "Why do you want to help them?" she said. Gone was the safety of hoping this was an elaborate training exercise. Gone was the chance of ever serving as an Lasden or Rena again. All his future held now in the endless row of latrines, coupled with everyone he worked with holding a full conversation as they deposited that morning's breakfast. "There's a kid among them," said Jadiro. Rena leaned back in surprise. "We found the tracks leading away from Snake's body. Tracks so small they must belong to a teen. They were running as fast as they could to get back to whatever they were chased away from. Rena's eyes darted back to Lasden. If he didn't push for it, I would have, said Lasden. The boot prints belonged to a girl, maybe older than the child, but not much. She outran Snake. She's outrun us, but there's a chance that right now she's getting the better of 20 people, at least twice her age and experience. Rena groaned and shook her head. What the hell kind of evening have you two had? Lasden nodded towards Judiro. Trial by fire. In the morning, a lot of people were about to rescue will face a trial by firing squad. You know that? Then for their sakes they better be really endearing when we capture them, said Lasden. Rena turned to the corporal by her side. Izad? Yes, Captain. Go get Lostrin, Drawn, Darrad, and Kenham kitted up. Get them here before midnight. Izad opened his eyes as a pleading look took over him completely. Before midnight? Judiro raised a cautious hand. Captain, it's Kinnan's birthday today. Rena slumped in her saddle again. So it is. She brought a hand up quickly to massage the eyelids before relaxing them back to her side. I don't suppose Renal has had a miraculous improvement in her aim? Even Lasden swayed at the sound of that. Bloody hell, woman. Even the horses avoid going near her when she has a musket in her hand. Well, it's either that, or we have 4 inebriate marksmen shooting at shadows in the dark. We already have 4 marksmen. Us, said Lasden. He turned to Judiro. Hand on your heart, can you recognize a brigand in imperial clothing from a merchant forced to wear a brigand's cloak? One will be in charge of the others, said Judiro, who turned back to Rena. I've got an 86 in under half mode from 50 yards, 90 in daylight. Those targets were standing still, said Rena. They weren't firing back. They weren't in a position to hold another target prisoner. Judiro bit down on his molars, clenched his jaw until it pained him. Just then, Rena turned her attention to Lasden. Judiro fought for it. They have an Imperial traveller with them. All eyes flashed his way, squinting at the least experienced man in the group until an Imperial traveller this far south is bad news. One caught in a gang of brigands is even worse. Carcosa could use it as an excuse to send an inquisitor our way, or he could blockade Lisbor and Esdale until we can assure him that all the brigands in these parts have been executed. The Empire already has its allies in Mokhara. They will find out what happened to one of their travellers. Lasden offered his wife a reluctant nod. It may even be a test of border security. They'll know that we don't have 400 thieves operating the north or 100 marksmen on patrol at all times. And all we have to do is scare them, said Judiro. Fire off our muskets and watch the gang run away. I can get 6 shots off in a minute. With all of us pistols as we can ride in like Hereth taking in the citadel of Askira and force them to run. He nodded to Lasden, Rena and Izard, trying to convince them all that his instincts about the brigands were more reliable than their first-hand experience with them. And who knows, maybe there's more of them dead from poison already, said Lasden. Rena turned to Lasden. It's your call, soldier. Lasden glanced over to the foot of Desira mountain range just a few miles away. On any given night, the brigand simply needed to see a patrol on the horizon to convince them to scatter. On the rarest of occasions, they might even fire from musket or two to keep the patrol at bay while they fled into the canyons. But Turstall's gang was made up of former mercenaries and privateers. Snake himself was rumoured to have served in the Great War and had an emblem tattooed across his chest to show the number of Dagura he had killed himself. This group wasn't as susceptible to running away as most. Lasden locked his concentration on the horizon. If Turstall is alive in the morning, He'll send a raid our way in revenge for losing Snake. So when we go in, it's not to scare them, it's to kill them. Turstale in particular, if he's there. The lieutenant rolled his shoulders back. All around him in the desert lay silent, a rest under the watchful eye of the goddess moon. Jadira and I will ride northeast towards the wolf mouth. You two head north to Erin's Rock. We'll meet in the middle. Rena gave a quick nod of approval. Okay, good luck. And for the love of God, don't shoot anyone from the Empire. So that is chapter 1 of the book. If you'd like me to read chapter 2, just let me know. Thank you.